As you may know, the theme for this year's season of creation is peace with creation, and the biblical text is Isaiah 32, verses 14 to 18. And in that text, Isaiah connects peace with creation with justice. He describes desolate cities, desolate land, and he says that is because of injustice in society and the fact that there is a broken relationship between people and God, and that our hope is that peace will return when justice and right relationships are restored. So we've got three amazing speakers here tonight, and all of them, we could probably have a whole evening with each of them. So I'm really grateful that they've come to be together this evening, and I think it's going to be a really, really rich discussion. So I'm just going to introduce the three of them, and then I will ask them some questions. Then there'll be time for you to ask questions. So this session is being recorded. So if you want to ask a question, but you don't want to be seen and heard on the recording, then there's some paper and pencils on the table at the back. Just go and write your question on there, and somebody else will ask your question for you. Okay, so on my left is Vanessa Elston. She is a Vicar of St Barnabas in Southfields in southwest London. She's also part-time chaplain to the Bishop of Kingston, with a focus on resourcing the church as a learning community. She originally studied English and drama, has taught drama in secondary schools and creative teaching and learning in the community arts sector. Gideon, on my far right, is an environmental activist and eco-theologian. He founded the Ghana Youth Environmental Movement, a climate justice organisation in Ghana, empowering youth to lead local climate action. He's also co-founder of Wild Rain, where his work is focused on nurturing both land and people to support nature-friendly agriculture. Then here on my near right is Paul Powlesland. Paul Powlesland is a barrister and founder of Lawyers for Nature, which campaigns for the rights of nature and to give nature representation in human systems. He's a guardian of the River Roding and lives on a boat on the river in Barking, which is not very far from where I come from. As well as acting to protect and restore the river, he also aims to transform our spiritual relationship with it. And last year, he became the first juror to swear an oath on the river. So I'm sure he's going to tell us. On any river, yes. The first juror to swear an oath on any river. So I'm sure he's going to tell us a bit about that. So welcome to our panel this evening. So I'm going to start by asking Vanessa to say something. So Vanessa, you have a background in drama, education, arts. You're a mother. You've run an organic veg delivery business. You've been a drama teacher. You've taught community musicians. And now you're a priest in the Church of England, which I know you understand as a vocation to catalyse spiritual awakening, a change of perception at the deepest level. And as a pioneer curate, you were involved in the 2019 Extinction Rebellion, which only strengthened your own commitments to challenging business as usual and the ongoing desecration and destruction of God's creation. So can you tell us a little bit about how that calling fits in with all the other bits of your life, how it came about and what part justice plays in that for you?
It's a bit like asking me to write my biography, isn't it? How does it all fit together?
Yeah, how does it all fit together?
Yeah, so that's a massive question, so I could go on for hours and hours, but I won't, don't worry. But it actually has been helpful for me because it's made me think about, the trajectory that I have been on. And I think, I grew up in the 60s and 70s in suburbia, kind of outside of London, but I think I always had a real sense of discontent and questioning about the world I was born into. I think even at an early age, I thought that things were not right. I remember thinking, it sounds a bit silly, but I remember saying to my parents, we need to have a real disaster happen for people to come together again. And I think it's just because I was experiencing the effects of consumerism, individualism, materialism, even back then. And I just thought, I just had this sense that I didn't think things were right. And then as I got older, I mean, I came from a Christian background. So of course, you know, as a teenager, I read Dietrich Bonhoeffer, The Cost of Discipleship, and told my parents they weren't really following Christ, although they were faithful churchgoers. And I think, you know, I can look back at that and think, you know, yeah, typical young person. But I think there was something. It was like the church felt really quite asleep. We did have Ron Sider's book that he wrote, Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger. So there was some awareness about deep structural economic injustices. But I think I just had this kind of deep dissatisfaction within me. But I was also really, really fortunate because as a child, I still had the ability, we were allowed to play outdoors. I had real freedom. We used to cycle everywhere. And so I feel that this ability to play outdoors imaginatively with other children deeply actually formed me and actually probably led in some ways into my love of theatre and drama. So I think for me, justice at its root means how do we live in right relationship with everything, with ourselves, with God, with nature, with each other. And there's something, and for me, that then became, because I felt like that wasn't there, it was a quest, but it was intrinsically then connected to questioning, but also to creativity. I think, you know, this sense of quest, adventure, exploration, searching, and I think that spirit of questioning is the thing that unites all those bits that you read out. I've basically, and I'm still on it, I'm on a quest, I'm on a search. And I think also in my youth, I grew up on the edge of London, and so I saw the kind of racial impacts of inner city life. I can remember the National Front marching past me and my friends sitting on a station, and it feels like we're almost going back there. But there was also inspiration. There was Nelson Mandela, South Africa, Tutu, Bob Geldof, Live Aid. So I also got a sense of things could change if people really do stuff. So I think in terms of my own life, my quest meant I rejected the sort of middle-class world of my parents and the idea of a career. And in some ways that cost me a lot. But I joined a sort of what was then the new church movement in the 80s. I joined a church called Ichthus, partly because as well as being connected to the charismatic movement, it had a real commitment to social justice. And I wanted to see those two things come together. And so I've been on this journey, and there have been many stages in that journey. Like all of us, life is never straightforward. It's never a neat linear path. You know, often we're doing this spiral thing where we revisit things again and again. But for me, a significant one was the Exile Rebellion of 2019, when I was a curate, and I just really felt that that moment, there was some kind of awakening literally going on. You could feel it. And I thought, I need to be part of this because there's something deeply spiritual about this. And I've been part of other grassroots movements. I was part of the road protest movement in the 90s. So I'm like, here it is again, this thing in our society that's welling up, that's saying there's something deeply wrong here and we really need to change. So for me, the XR moment was a real moment of waking up. Like a lot of people, you know, I had to go back and read the IPCC report and go, my goodness, I hadn't realized the trajectory was that bad. And that genuine sense of shock about why wasn't this in our media? Why weren't we all being told about this? So again, that was another kind of wake-up questioning. And that's led me as being ordained into the Church of England as an older person. I think my commitment, you know, you talked about as an educator, is I feel that as a church, we have deeply underestimated how deeply we're soaked in, and I'm going to use all these long words, empiricism, utilitarianism, materialism, pragmatism, scientism, technocracy, left-brainism, combined with this blind faith in the mechanism of the market. I just don't think we've really fully understood what it's like to be soaked in the mindset of our society and how deeply, deeply it forms us. And actually how hard it makes it for us to actually have that confidence in God and creation that Christ had. Christ had this fundamental confidence in creation and God. And I think it's deeply difficult for us to have that because of so much of the way in which we live, the environment in which we live in, and the mindset in which we're all deeply soaked. How long have I gone on for?
I mean, if you've got a bit more to say, that's fine.
So I could go on forever, but so I sort of feel, this is where I get a bit ranty, but I feel that, the church has failed to critique and interrogate modernity's version of progress and prosperity. We haven't asked what kind of progress, what kind of prosperity, and at what cost. These aren't simple questions, they're deeply complex questions. There are not easy answers, but we really, really need to wrestle with the questions because the very future of our world depends on it. So I think I'm just going to finish by just saying there's something about how in our modern world we've separated, facts. So we've mistaken that knowledge is or truth equals information, right? Truth equals information. And now, of course, we're in a post-truth world because everyone's just, people have realized they can manipulate information like mad. So we're not even in true information anymore. But even so, information doesn't equal truth. And I think the only way you get to truth is by loving something. If you don't love something, you won't reach truth about it. And so because we've separated love and value from information, we haven't known truth for a very long time. We live in a truth deficit. And I think the problem is it's this lack of love for our world that science can. A true science, if it is true, would actually deeply be a contemplation of creation. But science at the moment just serves the market and technology. And so there isn't that sense of deeper love. And I think that's what we're lacking. And that's what we need to restore. And I'll shut up there.
Thank you very much.
And just to say also that I think part of what we need to recover is practices like pilgrimage. Because those are things that slow us down, we go on a journey, we start to think together, we start to talk together, we start to question, we start to be outdoors. So I think there are some core practices as a church that we can start to recover to help us do this deep process of mind changing, how we see the world, how we understand ourselves, and what role the church might play in this moment.
Great. So I do really know that you were the right person to ask on this panel. So a lot of what you said really resonates, especially the XR moment, and the deepness of some of this stuff. Gideon, I'm going to turn to you next. And yes, like Vanessa, when I look at your CV, I can see a huge range of activity connected to environmental issues. So you've done community work in villages in Ghana, you've worked on renewable energy, set up a youth-led environmental organisation in Ghana, and in LinkedIn you use a lovely phrase about wanting to nurture land and people. And it's obvious that you've done that already in so many ways. So now you're doing a PhD in food systems, and that's quite a specific area. And I'm wondering whether you can tell us what led you to want to delve into that particular area in more detail, and also across the different work that you've done. Tell us a little bit about where you've particularly seen injustice affecting the lives of people and the state of the land.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And it's really lovely to be speaking here this evening. My wife has come with me from Bath, and we always say that when you have 3 kids under the age of 4, you don't get much time to do engagements like this because all your energy is invested in them, and sometimes you begin to lose yourself in the process. So coming here for me is an opportunity to reconnect to the things that I love talking about, which I don't really get opportunity to do in the past, over the past 5 years when we've started having children. But my story is, I would say, is quite diverse, you know, in terms of where my inspiration and motivation have come from. So I grew up in Ghana, in a very small village in the northern part of the country. So Ghana, for some of you who might, you know, I met somebody here who said she's been to Ghana, but Ghana is found at the west coast of Africa, so western part of Africa. And the place I grew up was an agricultural economy. My first engagement with food was through my mother, my late mother, may she rest in peace, who introduced me to food. So she had a farm. And so sometimes we wake up very early in the morning at dawn, around 5 a.m., and walk over a mile to the farm. I'm sure if that happened in these times, it will probably be framed as child labor. But it was such a beautiful experience of, you know, traveling with my mom and meeting some of my classmates, also going to, you know, their own farms and having conversations. And that kind of communal spirit was what gave life to, you know, the community that we lived in. My mom planted a lot of tubers because the place we lived in was more of a transition zone, the forest savanna transition. So that's where a lot of the food we consume in Ghana come from. So we're really contributing to the local food economy. But I was so little that I had no idea of what was happening. I was just really enjoying growing corn, harvesting corn, you know, sometimes supporting my mom to apply fertilizers. I had no idea or any framework about farming. Then we moved to the city because my dad is a priest. So we got transferred from one place to the other. So when we moved to the city and I started university, during one of the vacations, I decided to take a trip to a coastal community called Keta, which is a very tiny community. It's made of artisanal fishers, very, very small artisanal fishers group. And then I saw something that I had never seen my whole life. So I saw the coastal structures, households submerged in the sea, you know, and I was quite confused. I was like, how could this be possible? I had never lived in I had never seen a coastal community all my life, and to be able to come to the city to see something like that really kind of trembled me. And when I had spoken to some of the household members, they told me that a lot of the young people had actually moved to the city because the sea had actually moved and taken over the structures. This is how they described to me. But when I came back, I started doing a research on how the sea could literally take over people's settlement. And then I came to know about climate change. And that was in my second year in university. I was really furious because I couldn't really understand why something like this would happen. And for instance, governments would not respond in the way I expected, you know, government to respond, or people having conversations around, because I didn't really feel people were talking about climate change or wanting to do something about it. And then I chanced on Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, which was something that really inspired me. At the same time, I think there was the COP that happened in Copenhagen, which was a big failure. So there were a lot of youth movement across the world organizing, and that is where I felt the urgency and the motivation to form a movement in Ghana that will, one, bring young people together to educate people about climate change and also hold government to account for some of the things that were happening in our environment. Then, at a point in my life, I mean, I was born into a Christian home. At a point in my life, I started questioning my faith as far as environment is concerned, because when you go to Ghana and you talk to everyone, they will tell you Ghana is a majority Christian country. But I didn't really understand why our environment was the way it was, or why there was a lot of deforestation, there was a lot of land degradation, and there was a lot of negative impact on the environment, even though we were Christians. Because I know from what I was given as a Christian, I knew that Christians are supposed to love each other and care for the planet. And that led me to do a master's in African theology. And I must say that that was when my whole life perspective or worldview was really challenged, because I was born into a church where a white Jesus was given to me, basically. So when you come into our home, we have a white Jesus there, and that was what I knew, and that's how I framed my worldview, And when I studied African theology and really understood how the coming of the missionaries and the kind of gospel that was presented actually dispossessed the African traditional understanding of how we even care for the environment, because the African traditional religion or the African traditional way of doing things was actually demonized. And because of that, the values within our African heritage or African identity that actually brought us together as a community to care for creation was taken away. I began to feel really empowered that actually what I really want to do with my life is to work in community and build that kind of understanding that, a lot of the things that we believed as Africans, even before we were introduced to Christianity, are things that actually empowers us to care for nature and also to serve the God that we believe. Whether we are African Christians or whether we believe in African traditional religion, these are things in our own community, in our own understanding, through our own history, that empowers us to care for creation and live as kinship with creation, because that's a concept that is really powerful in our understanding as Africans. And so one of the things that we set out, myself and my wife, to do is to create an eco-village where we can support people in the community to start going back to some of the things that we believe to protect the environment, some of the values in African culture and tradition that we believe to protect the environment. For instance, if you go to Ghanaian communities, historically, they wouldn't, if it's a farming community, they wouldn't go to the farm on Thursday. If it's a fishing community, they wouldn't go to fishing on a Tuesday. And the whole concept was that we will allow the sea to rest, or we wouldn't farm and exploit resources, natural resources. But of course, because of colonization, because of capitalism, because of how we engage with westernization, there is a lot that is changing in terms of the way that we farm, and because people haven't really had the kind of understanding of how to work with nature, there's a lot of use of fertilizers, there's a lot of use of chemicals in the way that we produce food. And when you bring climate impacts, then that means that a lot of people are exposed to issues of food insecurity because the weather pattern is changing. There's a lot of droughts. When there's so much rainfall, there's a lot of flooding that do not support the crops. So our solution is to be able to empower local farmers. We have an initiative called Mushroom for Women, where we are supporting single mothers who are really struggling in the face of climate change because of the lack of fertility of the soil. We're actually involving them in mushroom growing, and also how to use mushroom growing to also fertilize the soil in an agroforestry kind of farming system that works in nature. And actually empowering these women to be able to take back a lot of the dignity that they've lost to respond to climate change and also improve their livelihoods. So I think for me, that is a way that we tackle injustice, the historical injustice and the current injustice that is being perpetuated by the global capitalist order or international relations between countries. My PhD also supports the work we do. So my PhD is on how Ghana and UK food trade, specifically banana trade, actually affects biodiversity in Ghana, and what are some of the ways that we can empower communities to move towards growing food in an agroforestry model that challenges global trade systems and gives an alternative to the way that we consume food globally, starting from some of the local actions that we can take in our own context.
That is amazing. Thank you so much for that story and explanation. That's really good. I was just about to ask Paul a question and he's run away. Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Gideon, for explaining that. And I think there's a lot that kind of sort of links to what Vanessa was saying as well. So, Paul, as a lawyer, I presume you know a bit about justice.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't guarantee that. It's not on. If you pull a little button.
You have to, yeah. So most of us think about justice as applying to people, but you've brought that concept into thinking about nature, particularly thinking about justice for rivers and for trees. So can you tell us a bit about what led you to do that and how that was connected to seeing justice and injustice?
Yes, is that working now?
Yes.
Great. I guess someone's been asked to tell a story about ourselves, but I want to tell a story about a far more important being. And some might say the most important being in Essex, although the River Chelmer might have something to say about that. 450,000 years ago, as the Anglian ice sheet retreated, having pushed the River Thames onto a southerly course which it now follows, the tongues of ice slowly melted. And in the valley, one of the valleys they formed, water started to flow down towards the Thames. And over hundreds of thousands of years, before human beings even stepped foot on this island, that flowing of water became a river. Completely nameless, of course, because there were no humans to name it. And it supported what we would now come to see as fantastical, unbelievable, prodigal amounts of life and beauty and wonder in this land that we now call Essex. And when humans first came to these islands, we don't know exactly how they perceived that river, but from some archaeology and from the way that indigenous people around the world currently view nature, we can be pretty sure they didn't see that river as merely a resource. They saw her as alive, as wondrous, as in some ways sacred, and something to give praise and thanks towards. But across the seas, completely unbeknownst to that river, something was stirring. And in a tribe in what we now know as the Middle East, a holy book was written, which, perhaps through mistranslation, perhaps through deliberate ploys, in its very first chapter, came to say that humans weren't guardians or stewards of the earth, the earth was not alive, the earth was not sacred, that instead we were to have dominion over the earth and nature, and that we were to subdue it and effectively to use it for our own ends. And a few thousand years later, that idea was brought to these lands, and the River Roding, the river I love, the river without which there would be no Essex as we know it, went from being a goddess to being a resource. That might not have been too bad necessarily were it not for two further things which happened. The first is where my profession comes into this, and where I have to accept some of the blame for what's occurred to nature and to my river. We took that idea, the idea of dominion in the Bible, in Christianity, and we made it part of our legal architecture and framework. In the very first book, expounding the common law by someone called Blackstone in the late 18th century, he said that the earth and all things herein are the common property of mankind from the immediate gift of the Creator. So the river went from being a goddess to being mere property. And of course, we know that if you own something, you can do what you want with it. And that thing no longer has its own interests, no longer has its own justice. It's entirely subjugated to your needs. One further thing happened, which was to lead to the catastrophic destruction that we now see of the natural world in these lands, and of which the River Roding is a prime example. Because before the 18th century, although the human attitude towards nature was terrible, and we effectively held it in enslavement, we couldn't be overly destructive towards it, because as many of you know, if you try and do gardening or any activity, it's actually quite hard to hold nature in check if you're just using human power. But not, of course, if you suck the energy from hundreds of millions of years of photosynthesis from underneath the earth and employ it towards the destruction of nature. And post the Industrial Revolution, we now have the power to utterly destroy every single ecosystem, every living part of the earth, and we are rapidly using that power. And the results are there to be seen. Come to the River Roding, or look at the map on my table over there, which was done within the lifetime of that map was made after my grandparent was born, so less than 100 years ago. You'll see marshes, meanders, forests, all destroyed within the last 100 years. Come down to Barking, where I live, and see the result of this story that I've set out to you. And you'll see something strange there, and this is where we come to justice. It is a testament to the ingenuity of English lawyers that we gave legal personality the right to engage in the legal system and human systems to entirely fictional entities like companies which do not exist. They're just something we made up. Tesco, Thames Water, BlackRock, all just entire figments of our collective imagination. We gave legal personality to these fictional entities before we gave them to living beings, holy, sacred, living beings like rivers, which have existed, as my story set out, for hundreds of thousands of years before humans even came to these islands, and will exist long after we're gone, or long after this civilization is gone. So if you go into central Barking, you'll see there's a bit of the Roding which is lifeless. It's in a sheep-piled channel through the centre of Barking. Almost nothing lives there, apart from a few of the cheeky trees that I've stuck in over the last few years. And right next to it is a Tesco, which, if you go into Tesco and you commit a crime, or you infringe upon Tesco's legal rights, like, for instance, throwing sewage all over the aisles, or stealing from it, or just dumping your rubbish into the entrance, you will find that Tesco is able to enforce the law against you. If you do the same in the river next door, in my river, this sacred, holy river, almost nothing will happen to you, even though you've broken the law, because the river has no right to enforce the law, and government agencies are not doing it on the river's behalf. It is a great and monstrous injustice. I don't want to leave you, though, with in too much of a negative mind. Things are bad, but every single one of us has the power to change that. And I know that because of my story. 8 years ago, I moved to the River Roding without any official permission whatsoever, without any allowance from any government agency. Indeed, the Environment Agency really wish I rather wasn't doing the work I was doing and wish I would go off and do something else. Good luck with that. Without any ecological training and without any background in nature. My family, a working class family, had never been interested in nature, never took me to nature reserves as a kid. That was never part of my upbringing whatsoever. I am a lawyer, but I haven't actually used any legal case for the river since I've been there. It's all just practical action. And I did the most important thing, which anybody can do in relation to nature, and it's something you alluded to, which is to fall in love with it. And not necessarily to fall in love with nature in general, to fall in love with a specific part of it. Because humans, as we know, and as the church teaches us, are ultimately creatures of love. People don't come to church or convert because you give them statistical analysis of how their life is better under Jesus. They do it because of love. People do not raise their children because of a utilitarian calculation about it. They do it because of love. All the great saints and sages, martyrs throughout the ages, did not give their lives for their faith, for utilitarian reasons. They did it because of love. And I felt that love coming from this river. A love so great and so deep, I would, if it came to it, give my life for this river. And actually, not even if it came to it, because I am giving my life to this river, not through death, but through action. I have made this my main purpose in life, and it's the most rewarding and beautiful journey that you can go on. And just to also talk about this idea of pilgrimage, I also really fundamentally believe in the idea of pilgrimage to nature, but not just to walk along it, to get a nice feeling of it, to really let nature teach you what it needs you to know. So I walked the entire length of the River Roding and observed, and just by that fact of observation, I was able to learn, or rather, she was able to teach me what she needed from me and what most gave rise to life. And since then, and this is normally an hour's talk I do, so I'm going to have to do it into 1 minute, I have done whatever it is that I need to do for this river, starting off with a bit of rubbish picking here, planting some trees, starting to campaign for better developments in the planning system for the river, going out on the river in a pair of waders and a big bucket to catch raw sewage coming into the river and to say why that shouldn't be happening. Dozens of different ways that I've gone out to care for that river. And people often say to me when they talk about this kind of stuff, "Oh, thank you so much for what you're doing. It's really good to see." And I genuinely don't or want or need that gratitude, because it is. I'm trying to think of the words used in communion. I think it's our duty and our joy, isn't it? Yeah. It is our duty and our joy. And caring for that river is my duty and my deepest, deepest joy. And I tell you that if you haven't managed to fall in love with a part of nature and care for it with all your heart and all your soul, you haven't truly lived. There's a little part of life that is really missing. And I cannot urge you enough to step into that, because it's just such a beautiful, if sometimes challenging, experience. Thank you.
That's a lovely place to end. Thank you very much, Paul.